Can you hear me okay? Do I need to use the microphone? I think it's pretty intimate here, so if you guys need to move in close, you can. So, my name's Ryan. I live in Pullman, a couple hours south of here, and I'm part of a podcasting group called Prepper Broadcasting Network, and I'm on a podcast called The Rising Republic. And a lot of the members in our group have been routinely invited to go and speak at events just like this. And one of the biggest ones in the country is called Prepper Camp, which is in Saluda, North Carolina. Last year, as most of you know, there was a hurricane that swept through portions of North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and on through. And this topic today, what I'm going to be talking about is some of the lessons that I learned by being there on the ground, and some of the things that I observed and just kind of took in as a prepper or survivalist or whatever you want to call it, among other people of like-minded mentalities, and then in some instances people who were learning and some of the things that they wound up learning the hard way. Before I get started, do you guys have any questions that you want me, or topics that you really want me to focus on regarding the hurricane, or the environment, or anything of that nature? Yeah.
Is there any possibility that these storms can be created?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Operation Popeye?
I've heard the term.
Yeah. So Operation Popeye, for those of you who aren't, and did play into this, I think, in a big way. And this is something that we were watching closely leading up to the event and immediately following the event, because people were actually paying attention to plane activity over the Gulf Coast and how it affected the path and trajectory and force of that hurricane. Operation Popeye was a declassified military campaign during Vietnam, where they essentially used airplanes to drop a specific chemical in the air. It's aluminum. It's alumina, or a certain type of aluminum. And what it does is it forms clouds. And in the formation of those clouds, they were able to modify the monsoon season in Vietnam. And by doing that, they were able to cut supply lines to the enemy, the North Viet Cong. That was recently declassified, and a lot of people think it's like hocus pocus that they're cloud seeding or doing these things, but we're actually seeing now more in real time with the sharing of information and aviation path marking and even apps on your phone, what can happen and how some of these things are so closely related. So yes, the short answer is yes, but I definitely recommend looking into Operation Popeye if you're curious about more of that. Yes?
Have you heard of HARP?
Yes. I don't remember what it stands for. It's HAARP?
Yeah, it's in Alaska. They're able to somehow modify the weather. It sends some type of...
like a microwave through...
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I have heard of it. I haven't done a whole lot of research into that. I mean, there's enough things to scare me right now to where I don't need to go digging into deeper holes. But so essentially, I speak at these kind of events. I have a freeze drying class right after this one. That's what I was down in Saluda, North Carolina to do. So we'll take you through the event chronologically. Basically, what had happened is all of us come from different parts of the country. Some from Illinois, West Virginia, Texas, me from Washington, other people from different regions of the world, Florida, Louisiana, different places. Some of these people had been used to hurricanes before, and they were normal occurrences for them. So they were used to it, and they kind of knew the trajectory of these things and how they would play out. Of course, me being from the Northwest, I'm used to rain, so why not, right? It's fine. I'm sure I can handle it. And the storm weather predictions I had been watching, I had booked the flights 6 months in advance. I had booked my hotels several months in advance. And I had committed to speaking at this event. This event It's similar to this, but it's about 10 times the size. There's about 3,000 to 5,000 people that show up typically daily. So it's a pretty big commitment. And for one of the speakers to not show up, then they have to try and rally to find someone else to fill that time slot. And I make commitments, 6, 8, 9 months in advance. So, I felt obliged to show up. So I drove up to Spokane, getting ready to catch my flight, and I'm watching this weather information, and they're saying, oh, tropical storm, and then it's been upgraded to a hurricane, and it's going to make landfall roughly this time. And at this point, it was still over the Gulf Coast. And I knew that watching their predictions, what it was likely to do. So I was like, well, I was kind of watching it. And as I'm watching it, my friends from different areas of the United States, some of them were going, hey, this is different. This looks a lot like Katrina. This is shaping up very similar to some of the other storms that we've seen where we don't want to be any part of it. So some of them, hardcore preppers, folks that have far more gear and skill and experience than I do, were backing out. And I'm sitting here at the terminal looking at my phone, watching some of these people back out. And I'm like, hey, am I out of my element here? Should I still go? Are you guys still going? Who's going? Who's not? Majority of the people were going at that point. And granted, I am leaving with nothing more than this. This is exactly what I had with me for the duration. And there are limitations to flying with certain tools that most preppers will basically have as their standbys. Name a couple of them. Knife, right off the bat. What else? Hatchet. How about a firearm? Water. Food. I can have some food in here, but if I've got all my camp gear, sleeping setup, clothing, dry weather gear, all that kind of stuff. So I'm basically maxed out because I absolutely refuse to check luggage because I know what happens to check luggage, and I don't want to wind up in the middle of a tropical storm or a hurricane while my luggage is in New Jersey being shipped back home, right? So I never fly, or whenever I fly, I never check baggage. So I have learned to be able to survive on what I have on my bag. This is not a bug out bag. This was a survival bag for me for that week. And there's a difference between those two things. I modified things all the way up to the very last minute when I got out of my vehicle to go board the plane. One of the first things I changed was my boots. What I did was, once I saw the weather predictions and how bad things were getting, I started realizing that, this isn't gonna fly, having leather boots in a region where I'm in the mountains and I have what's looking like 9 to 10 inches of rain dropping over the course of 1 or 2 days. Because we all know what it's like to camp when it's wet out. I was out here last night myself, and I've learned over time the importance of staying dry, especially your feet. So first thing I did was get rid of my leather boots, and I had rubber boots with me. And that's what I walked right through TSA with, and I had them on the entire time during the event. So I just mention that because it's really important to modify what you have with you based on the circumstances that you're facing. And it's really important to look ahead in those types of instances to see how weather or situations are going to impact you physically and your environment that you're going into. Now, granted, most people would just say, no, this isn't my deal. I don't want to do this. But a lot of the reasons why people go to these events is because they want to learn how to survive and how to thrive, essentially, in events like this, to be able to do it. So if I am standing here as a person who preaches this kind of stuff, I should be able to at least handle myself, right? So I finally commit. I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and fly out. And this is an important decision because once I commit, there's no turning back. Once I get there, I'm basically seated at the event, and I am in that storm no matter what, regardless of how heavy or light it might be. Wind up flying into Charlotte. And then I meet someone who drives me to the event. We're both speakers, and we've been doing that for a couple of years now. So we drive over, and it's just starting to rain. It's about like it is out here right now. Just light rain, nothing too crazy. Show up to the event. I set up my sleeping system, and basically, I have learned that tents are a major pain whenever you're camping. And one of the main things that I've learned over time is that you never want to let your gear touch the ground, period. Even your backpack, if you can avoid it. There are a lot of things that you can do to try and prevent that. Running slings or having a pack that you can hang on a branch or sling it up to a tree, something of that nature. But for me, because I was outdoor camping, instead of having a tent, I'm running a hammock. So I have a rainfly, bug screen, hammock, underquilt, and a sleeping bag inside here, along with my clothes, my solar setup, and toiletries, things of that nature, to last me at least a week. When I landed, we right before the event, right before we get there, we stop for food, water, beer, whatever, and we resupply our fuel. And keep that in mind, because that's going to come into play later on in this story. So we show up, I go ahead and set up camp. It's starting to rain a little bit heavier, and the predictions for the rain are getting more and more. So from the time that I left, from 8 to 9 inches over a 3-day period, it had gone up to about 10 or 11 inches over a 2-day period. By the time I had set up my tent, it was up to 12 to 14 inches over a 12-hour period. And that number kept changing and increasing over time, which is something that was very peculiar, because even the people in that region were like, this is not normal. For those of you who aren't too familiar with where North Carolina is, or where this event was, it's in Saluda, North Carolina. So here you have the East Coast, here you have North Carolina. Charlotte sits on the western third of North Carolina, and the event was about 2 hours west, which is about an hour and a half south of Asheville, which is one of the communities that was hit the hardest in this storm. The storm itself wound up going directly over the top of us during the event. And one of the first things that I did when I got there was, because I could tell it was raining, it had already been raining a little bit, maybe a half inch at that point. I took this tumbler out, opened the lid, and set it on near the base of a tree where I had set up camp. And I just let it sit there, because to me, weathermen don't always tell the truth. So I was like, I wonder how accurate this is going to be, if I can actually get 12 inches of rain out of here. This isn't 12 inches, obviously. That's probably about 8, 10 maybe. So I just left it there to kind of see what was happening. After I got my tent set up, I started, I got all my stuff dialed in, and I wanted to go around and double check to make sure that other people were doing okay, because it was starting to rain. And for anybody who's ever had to set up a tent in the rain, it's probably one of the most miserable experiences in your life. And it's always helpful if you have someone else around to be able to show you how to do certain things, or to help hold the stakes, or get that frame up, or something like that. Just having an extra hand around is a help. It's a huge help for people that need it most. So I was going around helping people, and what I was finding is that several of the people who were there, it was their first time camping ever in a tent. And they were probably going to have one of the worst experiences of their life, but it was all I could do to at least make sure that they had, were able to get their stuff set up. One of the folks up to this point, several people had canceled because there were, and even people within our group. So there was a tent city area that's similar to this here, where you have basically a course for 2 vehicles and then tents on the sides. But instead of this terrain, where you have it flat and then it tapers down, it was the opposite. You had it flat, and there was a valley that came down into that camp area. And I had planned to set up camp in that region, But because of the cancellations, they were like, hey, we have openings in this other area of the campsite or the campground. They're a little bit more undercover and higher ground. So I was like, set me up, because I don't want to be in this particular area, because I knew what was going to happen. And so I went and set up camp. There was a couple of other folks who were able to take advantage of that as well from my group, who were also from the East Coast, Myrtle Beach, I believe. I think that's South Carolina. This was kind of an interesting viewpoint for me, because you have people who show up to these events and they're there to learn, and other people who are very skilled. This couple showed up, and the wife is she was one of the presenters. She talks about spinning wool and carding and doing stuff like that. And her husband was there to learn. This was kind of new to him. He was in the military, but it's been growing on him because he's realizing some of the things that are happening in the world. And he steps out of their vehicle, and he is wearing sneakers, socks, shorts, and a t-shirt. And that's it. And he brought kind of like a light jacket that was kind of like a jersey jacket, right? So the first thing I did when I pulled out of my pack, because I had packed a couple of things with me that I knew would be extremely valuable. One is poncho, and I'll send this around so you guys can see it. This is another thing. These are overpants, Gore-Tex, military issued, and they're designed to go over the top of the pants that you're wearing. I had planned to wear these, but as soon as I saw that guy, I knew that he was completely unprepared for what that we were about to experience. And as the rain started pouring down, you know, he went from tough guy in shorts to, hey, I think I might put these on. He wound up wearing them the entire weekend. And I want to just use that as an illustration, because in some cases, even if you have enough gear for yourself, if you are more capable, or if you're willing to be able to sacrifice for someone else, it might actually be more advantageous to do that for you. One thing I didn't quite mention yet was that they also had an infant with them. So how helpful is that father going to be to that young child when they're miserable and wet and can barely even maintain their own body heat? Not a whole lot, right? So sometimes there are things like that. And by the way, those have been washed. He didn't wear them for a week, and I threw them back in the pack. They've been clean. But those are 100% waterproof, and that's one of the last things I threw in my pack before I left home. This proved to be the most valuable piece of equipment in my gear. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a firearm. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't even a water filter. This is a poncho, and it's a good one. And I highly recommend, even in the Northwest, you should have something like this at all times, at least in your garage, in your car, something. This particular poncho is made by One Tigress, and it's designed to not only be a poncho, but it doubles as a shelter. You can see there's little eyelets on the bottom. You can use it. One Tigress, Tigrrs. I'll pass it around. You can see it. But note the fabric and the material. You can feel there's a rubberized membrane on the bottom of it. If you're ever looking for a poncho, you want to make sure you have some kind of membrane like that, because that's even with the quality of this, I was still getting wet because it was raining pretty much constantly. And that's something that you need to be mindful of, that once you're wet, you're going to stay wet. But if you can at least provide kind of a barrier, then it'll make you at least a little bit more comfortable and really, prevent things like hypothermia and illness and stuff like that.
Is that actually better than rain gear?
Not necessarily, but keep in mind I had weight and space restrictions to consider. I do have rain gear in my vehicle. like heavy duty rain gear, because for an instance where it's heavy downpour rain and I'm in my vehicle, if I have to crawl under it, I don't want to use that. I want to use something that would hold up against scraping and stuff like that. This is more light duty for camping and getting around. But what is nice about that is it's large enough for you to be able to wear it over your pack, which is why I bought that, because it's much larger than a typical poncho. Because why? I need to keep my gear dry no matter what. If I have to break camp and get out of there, there's a good chance that I'm gonna have to wear a pack, and I need to keep my stuff dry as much as possible.
Did they end up canceling the event at Saluda because of
Nope. So, on with the story. I get set up. I hand out some of my gear. We get, rudimentary tarp set up to kind of divert water away from our campground. It's starting to really pour down. Everybody pretty much shuts it off because we can't start fires. There's no way for us to get warm. People are sleeping in their cars or getting in their tents and getting stuff set up and trying to stay dry. And we pretty much most people are pretty much crashed out as soon as the sun sets, which is right around 7:30. At this time, we had internet access. We had our cell phone towers were working, everything was good to go. And then the storm starts to pick up. We start getting more wind. We start getting more rain. And it made it extremely difficult to sleep, because it was pretty much like having, if you were to think about like taking a tarp and then put it in your shower and then turn the shower on and then leave it like that for about 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. Because that's exactly what it sounded like with that rain coming down on my rain fly or a tent or whatever it might have been, RV campers or whatever. The other thing was the wind. In a hammock, it's a little bit tricky, but it's not impossible to be able to tie your gear down and make sure that it's dialed in. But we were talking, we had a couple of gusts last night. Obviously, there were some, I don't know if you guys saw the damage this morning, but there were some gusts that threw some of these, where these pop-up tents all over the place and pretty much destroyed them. Those gusts were going pretty much all night. And it was like, it was kind of relaxing because I kind of had that little bit of sway going in my hammock, but it was also a little bit spooky because not only was the hammock swinging, but so were the treetops. And as soon as I started hearing some of those crack, and then a few seconds later hit the ground with a giant thud, it started to worry me a little bit. These trees are probably 30, 40 feet tall. The ones in Saluda that I was clamped onto are about 60 feet tall. And the soil there is much like it is here, in that it was kind of a red clay. Maybe not quite as rocky as it is here, but mostly clay material. Now, over time, some of those snaps started to die off, but there were some that were a little bit larger and more resounding. One in particular, people were describing it as an explosion. Some people were describing it as a boom. The next morning, when people started to wake up and realize, that nobody got any sleep and we may as well get up and have some breakfast anyway, they realized that was actually one and the same. A tree had fallen and hit a transformer and caused it to explode, which eliminated all power to the campground. And we were trying to get details on what was going on with this storm, but nobody's cell phones would work because the cell towers had been down. They had been destroyed in at least in the region where we were in, and most people had no access to the outside world. So right off the bat, we're starting to live these stories that we read all the time, where all of a sudden something happens and then you have no power, you have no communication with the outside world. And we started regrouping to find out what was going on. Well, as we are looking around, we're realizing that there's trees that are down. There are trees down on power lines in a campground. And so we've got live power issues there. We know we'd have no communication. And the event typically starts off like this one, where some of us, we stay the night, and then the people who are here to learn about things are starting to roll in. You know, the parking lots will start to fill up, and people learn how to, you know, find what they want to see on their schedules and stuff like this. Well, that wasn't happening. And we soon realized that wasn't happening because the roads were blocked all the way from the event, which is up on a mountain, down to a town, which is about 20 miles away. So a couple of the guys who were there also as presenters, because again, most of us show up early, one of them was teaching a course on cast iron cooking and smoking, and they were set up there to be able to, you know, serve food at the event. The other one was there as a butcher, explaining to people how to butcher a pig. So he had all of his basically day-old pig that he had on ice, that he had in quarters basically, or halves I think he had, and he was going to teach people how to process it, and then they were going to smoke it and sell it to people during the event. Their typical process to show up, get their stuff on site, and then go out and cut wood, because the wood that they would cut would be what they would use to supply the smoker. So they wound up being the chainsaw crew and cut a path all the way down into town so that they could at least get back into town and get an idea of what was going on and how bad the situation was. That kind of was a bit of an eye-opener to us. You know, and me, I'm not packing a chainsaw on a plane. I do have chainsaws at home. I'm not packing a gun on a plane. I do have guns at home. Some of these other people, they're out to camp just like we are. But all of your gear doesn't necessarily wind up with you wherever you might be. So luckily we had a couple of people on the mountain who could cut our way out, because as we found out, there was nobody coming in, and there was nobody who was prepared to come in and come get us, so to speak, right? Because the event that we were hosting, a lot of the people who were trying to make it in couldn't physically make it because there were roads washed out. We were finding out that entire villages were pretty much rolled over by levees that had broken, by dams that had failed, by floods that had just ravaged through some of these towns. And this had all happened overnight. So people were trying to get to the event. They physically couldn't. Not only that, they couldn't let anybody know that they couldn't make it. And we couldn't let anybody know that the event was still going on. So the communication component there was huge. Luckily, there was one person who drove from Seattle all the way across country to North Carolina, and she was there to set up all the AV stuff, the speakers, the microphones, the TVs, that kind of stuff. And she had a contract with the event people who would set it all up to be there to set it all up. So she was on her way, and she was just outside of town. She rolled up as soon as those roads opened up, and she saved pretty much everybody with one piece of equipment. Any ideas?
Starlink or
Yep.
solar array?
Right there, Starlink Mini. She happened to be traveling with her boyfriend, who had to stay working during the time that they were driving across the country. And in order for him to be able to maintain communication with his office, they brought their Starlink Mini along with them.
What's the Starlink Mini?
It's a satellite dish that's designed to be able to provide internet access anywhere you are. So they could run it off of an inverter or a 12-volt power supply, whatever that is, or however it's set up, I'm not entirely sure. But when they showed up, all of a sudden, we were able to make contact with the outside world and find out what was going on. So for about a 12-hour period, we had, and it might have been even longer, it might have been closer to 18 to 24 hours by the time she actually showed up, and we realized that, hey, we have communication now. That was probably one of the most eye-opening experiences and circumstances, was how important communication was. Because in an event like that, if you're cut off from the outside world, you have no way to get information in or out. And I can't emphasize how important that is, especially when you have people who might be stranded or hurt or might need supplies or might need to get out. We found out later that weekend that because of the efforts of those two guys who were running out clearing roads, there was one pregnant woman who was a resident near the campground who was actually able to get out and have her baby delivered. And she wouldn't have been able to do that if those guys weren't there. So where do we go from here? We have sparse communication with the outside world. We're trying to get people dialed in, find out what's going on. We are finding out rapidly that people are not showing up, including food vendors, which is a little bit concerning when people like me who show up with enough to get through the weekend are able to do it. But some people are relying solely on food vendors who are at the event and show up and they have no food for themselves or their children or whatever. So we're finding out fast that that's not happening. Another thing that we're realizing from the top of the mountain is that as people are firing up their generators to power their cell phones or, get their space heaters going or get their dehumidifiers going, as people are coming into town, we're realizing that there is no fuel to be had at the bottom of the mountain. And the guy who I loaned those pants to, he wound up leaving as soon as he could get out because they didn't bring milk. And so he wound up leaving to go see if he could get milk and get fuel. Well, he wound up spending a half a day or so driving around, only to find out that not only could he not get fuel, but if he could get food, it was cash only, and all the prices had been jacked up significantly within a 12, 14-hour period of the event. And by the time he got back, after realizing this and spending most of his cash on what little food he could get, he had burned up about a half a tank of gas. So he wound up spinning his wheels trying to make things work instead of just staying put and finding another way to get the same thing, maybe from someone else who was already on site. So in that example, it really makes sense for you to be able to regroup, pay attention to what resources you have available, and see what you can do to network and find out what you might be able to exchange for things that you need so that you don't have to leave. In some instances, it is better to stay put. In this particular one, it was. The next morning, as I'm walking around, I'm looking at some of these environments, and I'm seeing the rainfall, and it's kind of letting up a little bit. But even up where we were in the mountains, there were rivers forming in the streets. Kind of like these little roadways here, you can kind of see them. And they were carving paths in the street to get out, to get to a lower point. And then that would carve a path to get to the next lower point till it filled up. And then that would go to the next point where it would go. And I could see the progression of what was happening here from the top of the mountain. And I knew that what was going to happen down south, at a lower elevation, was only beginning. Because at that point, people had started to see that, there was a storm that came through, there were power lines down, there's this. But they haven't even started to see the floodwaters that are about ready to come in. So we already don't have fuel, we have limited food, our resources are somewhat tapped, and we have no idea who's coming in. So we wound up regrouping a little bit to try and at least identify who had what and establish more of a community and try and identify if we should even have this event in the first place. They did wind up holding off the vendors. And the reason is because the next morning, the people who had showed up to set up all their tents in Tent City, none of the tents survived. Every single one of them had been destroyed. And with the exception of maybe one or two campers, the majority of them, like if you had any kind of a canopy like that or, a 10-man tent, it would collapse. Even with a 1/2-inch metal tubing, didn't matter. If it wasn't anchored down properly or again, if you're dealing with clay and you anchor down to clay, how well is that going to work if that anchor rips out? You're losing your rain flies, you're losing your other stuff, and even if you're sitting in it, you might be weighing it down, but eventually, with enough water and force, a lot of the lids and the tops of these tents wound up imploding. And sometimes they have these kind that are like a tent, and then it'll have an awning that comes out. A lot of those are what destroyed people's tents because they filled up with water and took the whole tent down with them. So a lot of the folks that were in Tent City were like, they had no shelter at that point. They had pretty much lost what they had. And some of those folks wound up having to leave, or at least try and regroup or patch together their tents so that they can make it through the weekend. Eventually, we caught a break in the weather. It stopped raining. The sun did come out, and we wound up being able to continue the event. So we did the normal thing. The turnout was obviously much lower than normal, but we were still able to do our presentations, and people were able to interact, and we were able to butcher the pig and smoke it. And that was one of the main sources of food for anybody who didn't bring their own. And it was really important. And a lot of people might say, well, why didn't you just cancel the event and get out of there? Well, it was actually more, and that was a big decision to be made by the people who had set it up and all the people who were there. And part of that decision making had to do with reestablishing a level of normalcy, allowing people to get to the point where they felt like it was okay, and then things are going to be okay, and that we're not in a permanent state of chaos. So continuing the event was actually more beneficial to the people who did stay, so that they didn't feel trapped, and they stayed occupied. And again, the number one thing, probably the biggest takeaway that I had aside from keeping dry, was keeping people fed. People don't pay attention to how important it is to make sure that if you have people in an event or in a group, you got to make sure to keep them fed, because that can turn things fast. And that's what happened down below as time went on. So I forgot to mention, the next morning when I woke up, this was overflowing. So it was every bit of 12 to 14 inches of rain over the course of about 12 hours. And you all know what happens when it rains up high and all around. Wherever it collects up high, it's going to go down. And that's exactly what happened in the valleys below. That's the footage that you guys saw on the news, on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it was. That was a fraction of what it was. At the end of the event, we all packed up, and some people took off early. And again, we're all coming from different parts of the country. Some of us drove in, some of us fly in, some of us are hauling trailers, some of us are in our own little personal vehicles. And we're all going different directions. So some people are headed north to Chicago, Illinois. Some people are headed west through Tennessee. And as people are leaving, we're finding that the paths that they used to get in aren't the same as the paths that they had to use to get out. So, and this is not necessarily a good thing, because especially if you're a stranger in a land that you're not familiar with, in terrain that you're not familiar with, or on roads that you're not familiar with, taking backcountry roads in East Tennessee or something like that might not be the best place for you by yourself. So there are some places where people really had to be diligent and make sure that they could find alternative ways home. And their travel times went up significantly as a result of that. So their pathways home were significantly higher. And we're getting news of this as people are leaving. Now my situation's a little bit different. Again, I've learned to pack light and make sure that I can carry my gear if I need to. And for me, I'm 2,500 miles from home. So if my ride fails, or if something should happen, then I have to find a way to get to an airport or a bus station or something. And if I'm packing a bag and a tote and a bunch of other things, or kids in tow or whatever, that's going to change the dynamic of how I can move. So having a setup that allows me to move quickly was very important to me. And it was probably one of the most beneficial things on my plate, and one of the biggest things that I had to work, like working for me, going like to my advantage, so to speak. But I was still relying heavily on other people for transportation. On the way out, we actually started to see how bad some of the damage was. And as we left, so the gal I was with, she was driving an FJ Cruiser and a little U-Haul. They used to have camper trailers back in the 80s. It was one of those ones that she owns and refurbished and stuff. So they had cut paths just wide enough, maybe about 4 chairs wide. So just wide enough for about a truck to get by, and that's it. Some of these people were hauling huge camper trailers, like maybe, some of these 20, 30 footers with the tip outs and all that kind of stuff. And I can only imagine how difficult it was for those guys to be able to navigate some of these things. But some of the other things that we were noticing was that when power lines were down, people were just driving right over the top of them because there's no other way to go. And you would see in some instances where the trees that had been cut, some of them were cut the day before, but because of that water and the way it was moving and how it was affecting the clay, even trees that had been standing the day before, they were being impacted because of the water erosion. And there was new trees that were falling here and there. So there was signs of new pathways that had to be cut. In fact, one of the folks that were with our group, they were out there with hand saws that they happened to have in their vehicle to clear a path just so that they could get their truck and trailer out. But there was one time that I actually felt a little bit of concern, and throughout the whole weekend, the level of concern dropped because we were all working together. We were all like-minded. We were all working in a community, and we were all working toward the same goal. When we all were ready to leave, you started to see a little bit more vehicle traffic. Now, granted, we have one lane of traffic. In a normal environment, you have one lane of traffic that, what do you do when you roll up and there's someone else on the other side? You yield and let them pass, and then you go, right? And then if there's a car behind them, they yield and let you go, and then they go. Well, the lady that I was driving with was armed. She always carried a pistol on her hip. She had it the whole time we were driving and everything. I mean, the whole event, she was walking around with that thing. She's just a little thing. But because she's a widow, she lives by herself. That's her mainstay, and she's always been that way. I always wanted to make sure that she had that, especially down south. So she's driving, and we approach this fallen tree, and there's a truck that's coming through the one lane, and we pull up to yield. And as soon as it passes, we start to engage, and there's a vehicle behind them, and they start to engage as well. And for a moment there, we start to realize that as we are flagging this person off, like, hey, back up because we got a trailer behind us, they are saying, no, I'm going, you get out of the way. And for a moment there, I had my hand on the door because I had a feeling that I might have to get out. But there's a little bit of tension there, and it could have erupted into far worse if the other person hadn't yielded. And it kind of reinstilled that little bit of doubt that I have in humanity when it comes to events like this, because I don't know what this person was trying to get back to. It could have been a sick child or an elderly parent, or just because they felt like they were entitled and they deserved it right away. You don't know. And the other thing is, I don't know what that person has on them. I know that the driver in the seat next to me, she's got a firearm sitting right on her hip. She knows how to use it. I, on the other hand, am unarmed, and I've got 2,500 miles to go before I can get home. So there are other factors that kind of come into play, and all of a sudden these things start racing through your head, like, what if? What if that happened? What if that went the other way? As we start getting off of the hill, there was another moment that really kind of struck me, and we were driving down. We finally get off of the mountain, and we're kind of just, we're trying to ignore the carnage so that we can focus on the path out. We wind up getting to the highway, and the roads start opening up. The highways are starting to be a little bit more clear. And as we get closer to Charlotte, the fuel thing. Remember how I said I fueled up? We both fueled up right before the event. We found out later that the nearest place to fuel up after we had left the mountain was about 60 or 70 miles away. Now, that's not ideal, especially in an environment where everybody needs fuel, because what happens is that those gas stations that are 60, 70 miles away, lines and lines of cars, because that's the nearest place you could get fuel. The only place to get it was cash, and I can only imagine how hostile some of those environments might have been, especially after the encounter that we just had with a lady who just wanted to get past us, right? She'd been waiting in line for a day or 2 days, and someone decides to roll up with a threat or, make your life a little bit harder because you're the one with fuel in hand. It could get a little bit scary, and that kind of stuff did happen. There was a little bit of that going on. But as we were driving down, there was a guy that we were following. He was in like a Jeep or a little Geo Tracker or something like that, and he had an open trailer on the back of him, just an open flatbed Harbor Freight, trailer, something like that. And he had about 10 5-gallon gas cans and a bunch of coolers with him. And I was kind of watching this guy, and he's driving, following right in traffic, and his traffic is compressed. We're kind of near him. And she makes a comment, and she's like, if this was a worse situation, I would follow that guy. Why?
Take his fuel.
Take his fuel. He's got resources. He's got means. And what does he have at the end? At his destination? Equipment. Valuable pieces of equipment. So, as dark as it might seem, sometimes you need to think of those types of things, like what kind of harm someone could do to you based on what they see outwardly. And I am all about gear. I love gear, but I don't like showing it off. I'll show off certain things to be like, hey, look, this is something you might want to look into. But I am not the type to show up in a fancy, $80,000 van that's set up to the nines. To me, that is a red target on your back. You have to be really careful with operational security or the gray man mentality or something like that in a situation like this. Keep your stuff concealed, because if she was thinking this as a normal person, just like you, imagine what someone who had ill intent would be thinking, and how much farther they would go in the event that they actually felt that they needed it more than you, that they were more entitled than you. So it's really important to maintain that. If you're going to have gear or supplies, or if you're going to be traveling with things or in certain company, if that company is gone, you need to be aware of what you are projecting to the world just by driving down the road. So as I'm winding down this trip, we're finally coming out. I'm finally able to breathe and realize that, hey, look, this is done and over with. I survived. I stayed dry. I was able to help some people along the way, taught my classes, and now I'm back at the hotel room. Stay at the hotel, finally get a nice shower, because we had no power for hot showers at the event for about 4 days. And I wound up having a shower, and my flight leaves the next morning, and I'm starting to hear in the lobby some of these folks who are coming in from Asheville to Charlotte because they could not get hotels anywhere. And these people had lost their homes. They had lost their livestock in some cases. It was just complete devastation. And I'm kind of seeing it firsthand, but also hearing it firsthand. And at that point, I started to realize that this was not just a storm. I mean, this was far more significant than that. And the role that I played in it was minuscule. But it was extremely eye-opening to me from a prepper standpoint, surrounded by people who are also of the same mentality, and then going through, an environment or urban environment like that where things change and you realize that not everybody thinks the way that we do with these kinds of things. So kind of eye-opening to say the least. But after that, I really learned how to take care of my gear, my equipment, and really making sure that my family is taken care of. When I got back, my wife and I were talking about it, and she actually got upset at me because she was like, well, did you know the storm was happening? And I was like, well, yeah. I mean, I saw it on the news. I mean, it wasn't that. And then she doesn't watch social media or anything like that, but then she started getting the reports in of how bad the devastation was and how bad how many homes got destroyed and people displaced, things like that. And I was like, why are you so upset? Why are you upset at me? And she said, well, I thought the whole idea of being a prepper was so that you don't put yourself into those positions. You don't put yourself into those situations. And I couldn't argue with her. I mean, really, looking back, I'm glad that I was there. I'm glad I was able to be a part of it and, contribute in what little ways that I did. But she's absolutely right. I probably should never have been there in the first place. I mean, yeah, I was able to prove my gear worked and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if I had to find another way home, or if something had happened to me and we didn't get that Starlink, or we didn't have the chainsaws, I mean, it could have been a really, really bad situation for me personally. And not only for me, but for my wife. Totally unimpacted. Other side of the country. So make sure you're paying attention to how your actions, and I'll use myself as an example, how your actions are impacting the people around you, whether you may or may not realize it. I'm not sure that I have time for questions. Are you next?
I'm next, but go ahead.
What time is it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or anything? Yeah.
Those pants, is there something, not those, the ones you passed around?
Oh, by the way, this is basically what I wore. This, and I have a poncho that I wear underneath, it's a poncho. It's like a wool poncho that I wear underneath that. These pants?
Yeah, where can you get something like that?
Probably, these are actually military issued, but I got them from my neighbor's house because he moved and left them behind.
Oh.
So, but you could probably get them from, there's a military surplus site called GovPlanet. Sometimes they will sell this kind of stuff, but it's usually in bulk. So if you have one size, you might pay $100 for 20 pairs of them. When you get the right size that you need, you can get rid of the rest of them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, this was a lifesaver, not for me, but for somebody else. So, anybody else have questions?
Pockets there, are they separate from the slide?
Yeah, I chose to wear these pants at the event for that reason. So these are cat pants, like cat equipment.
Okay.
They have,
Are they attached?
yeah, these are sewn in.
Okay.
So it's like a tool pouch and they tuck in the pocket, which is nice. So these particular pants were nice to have because it allows me to carry more if I absolutely have to carry stuff on my person. And if I were to lose some things out of my pack, or if I need to carry more as a result of whatever, weather or food or things like that. So, any other questions? No? One more?
You've been in the high country like the Rocky Mountains.
So,
Going uphill, always have the right of way.
yeah. And that is the case. This is just a normal road. And I think it was more of a yielding type of situation because it was a flat road where we were. And it wasn't like around here. Yes, absolutely. Those logging roads. I mean, my brother and I, we used to bomb around over, the Fernand Saddle which is kind of up over Coeur d'Alene and on the other side of Montana. And yeah, you always yield to the logging trucks and anybody going up. So, okay. Well, thank you, everybody. If you're interested, I'll be teaching the freeze drying class right over in the yellow tent here right now, actually. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice, you guys.
Well, that's all I have for this video. Bang around that bell icon if you want to be notified when new videos come out. Call us on the hotline if you have comments or questions and want to be featured in an upcoming video. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe. Check us out on the website, and we'll see you guys on the next one.